Greetings all. Welcome to the live stream. I'm going to grab my headphones here and play a little tune before we get going. There we go. And here we go. I'm going to start over again. I had some errant sounds going on. Here we go. Good evening here in the eastern U.S. I know it's not evening all over the world, but wherever you are, hello, hello. So glad to be here. So glad that you're here too. I see a bunch of people on the chat already. Awesome guys and gals. Thank you so much. I'm trying a couple things differently on this live stream. I've got a little iPad here set up in front of me, and hopefully I can see the chat as we go along. So let's see who we have. We've got our Wilson Blue Sky, Tomas. We've got Inverted Popes. We've got Mr. Blank. We've got David Jacob. Daniel. Tim. Hey, Tim. How's it going? Mike Jones. David Jacob. Greetings, everybody. So happy to be here. So on this live stream, I'd like to do a couple of things. One is, we'll play a little music here over time, but I'd also like to talk about, as the title of the live stream says, developing a unique voice for your guitar. So let me, and of course I'll answer any questions you all might have as we go along, but let me tell you what I mean by, oh man, my guitar strap was on backwards there, weird. But let me tell you what I mean by developing a voice for the guitar. I'm a big believer that as instrumentalists, so whether you sing and play or whether you just play, the instrument itself speaks. I believe music is such a deep and powerful thing that even instrumental music communicates and speaks on a very deep level. So, for example, I'm going to speak to you right now. What did I just say? Well, I can't tell you in words. It's nonverbal communication. But when I play, I feel like I'm communicating with anyone who's listening to what I'm playing. That's what I mean by a voice, a musical voice. Let me see what's going on here. Hello, folks who've been hopping on. So glad to have you on board. So anyhow, the big question is, as you're thinking about your playing, how do you develop a voice for your instrument? How do you develop a language, or maybe an accent, right? How do you develop that nonverbal communication to be able to communicate to your audience? And that's whether it's recorded or live, right? And how do you develop a voice that is unique to you? So what I'd like to do during this live stream tonight is talk about a few techniques, tips, and tricks that I think can be very helpful as you might, if you don't already feel like you have a unique voice, as you're thinking about developing that unique voice. So I've got a little assignment here for all of you on the live stream right now. If you would, just throw in the chat window the name of your favorite guitarist, like the guitarist beyond all guitarists who has influenced you more than anyone else. Go ahead and throw that in the chat. I will play here a few notes while I'm waiting, and then I'll read off some of the answers here. That took a couple minutes because of the lag in the live stream, but I'm seeing some come in. Tim says Jan Ackerman, great choice. We've got Omar Rodriguez, Stuart Adamson. We've got Jeff Beck, Stevie Ray, Hendricks, and Mudau Mokhtar. If I got that wrong, I'm not familiar with him. Jack White, Johnny Greenwood, Jeff Beck, Michael Hedges, Doug Smith. There's so many. Yes, there are, aren't they? Let's see. Joe Satriani, Alan Holdsworth. Oh, Bill Vencil. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But what I want you to do is think about that guitarist that you really like and think about what you like about that guitarist. And I am willing to bet that at least part of it is the way that guitarist actually creates the notes on the guitar, right? So the phrasing, the tonality, like the whole picture of what they're playing just speaks to you. And somebody mentioned Alan Holdsworth there, Motorsport, and he's a great example for me, one of my all-time favorite guitarists. And what I love his tone, but what I really love about Alan Holdsworth's music is the phrasing that he uses to achieve his lead lines and his chords. And so it's the language, to use Alan as an example, it's the language that he developed, right? May he rest in peace, he's no longer with us. But it's that language that he developed and then used to communicate to us, right? And he told us something that we can't speak in words, but we understand it deeply, right? Because he had a very unique voice on the guitar. All right, great. Let's see. We've got Bob Fripp, Mark Bird, Gary Moore, Alvin Lee. Oh, man, you guys are all over the place. That's great. Julian Bream and John Williams. All right, two classical guitarists par excellence. Tail Winkenfeld. Oh, and Mike Oldfield, yes. All right. So let's talk about some techniques to think about in terms of developing a voice. So first, before we get to the fingers part, we do have to think about the instrument itself. So I don't want to get too lost on the instruments, because once you develop your voice, your musical voice, you will find that it translates to other instruments perhaps besides your main guitar or whatever. I think of many years ago, one of my son's friends brought me a guitar to do a setup on. I think it was an old Yamaha guitar. And so I did the setup, and then as I was finishing it up and put new strings on it, I went ahead and played it for a little bit. And my son, who was, 12, 13 at the time, walked by and said, "Dad, how come you still sound like you on Jeremy's guitar?" So you get that. That's the musical voice. But obviously an instrument has a lot to do with the musical voice. So as we think about it, as you think about the types of tones that you like, and they can be from your guitar heroes. That's totally cool. And think about the types of guitars they play, and that's probably the direction you want to be in, whether it's a humbucker single coil, P90 style single coil, whether it's a standard guitar or maybe it's a baritone like I have. They all have unique tonalities to the instrument itself, and that can certainly be the beginning of your voice, right? Because that's going to provide part of the musical color of what you're going to be saying musically. The next thing, just real quick to think about, is, let me go ahead and turn off some delays here. I'll talk about effects here in just a sec. The next thing to think about is the amplifier, or if you're like me, using an amp modeler, but that's kind of the basis of your tone, right? And you want to find a tune that complements the types of music you're going to play, the types of chords you like to play, maybe the types of leads you like to play. You want to find a tone that kind of complements that. So I'm going to hold off on the effects. You can see them there in the bottom right-hand corner. But the other thing I will say is, as you think about the actual tone coming out of the guitar amplifier, also think about how, as you go from clean to a distorted tone, getting tones that complement each other. They're not going to be exactly alike, but they should complement one another. So there's my clean tone. And if I kind of go for a little bit of crunch or dirt, you'll hear that it's very similar. All right, so it gives me a little extra, but it's still off in the direction of that clean tone. And even when I go into a full lead tone, it's still off in the direction. It's very distorted, but it's off in the tonal direction of even the clean tone. So that gives me a consistent feel kind of across whatever I'm doing. So I would encourage you to explore that too as you're thinking about tones that you like. Maybe it's a Fender amp style or a Marshall amp, a rectifier, or whatever it might be. Kind of give that some thought and how you can build some consistent tones. All right, let me pause there and see if we've got comments or questions that I can respond to. And then I'll talk about effects for just a minute, and then we'll continue on with the kind of the tips for the musical voice. All right. All right, good. Okay, we got Daryl Sturmer in there too. Hey, Lightning, how's it going, man? Yeah, Daryl is a very talented player, always has been. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about effects. I had sent out a couple of messages yesterday and said, hey, what amp modeler would you like me to use for the live stream tonight? And it was kind of surprising. More than 50% overall. It was on Instagram, Facebook, and the YouTube community. More than 50% voted for the Strymon Iridium. So if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see it sitting there. That's that little black box there on the left-hand side of the pedal board. So what I've got going on is 3 Strymon pedals, the Compadre, which is the compressor that I'm generally using right now. If you've been around for a while, you know that I used and still have a Wampler Ego compressor, which is a really great compressor. And you know, I've used it for years, and I know that I'll continue to use it in the coming years. But the Compadre is really, really nice, and I've been enjoying that since I've had it, since I bought it earlier in 2020. That's followed by the Strymon Riverside. That's the yellow box, and that's what's giving me the crunch and the full-on lead tone, and again, the Iridium. And I mentioned a Fender amp model, and what I'm running on the Iridium, let me look real quick. Yeah, I had to remind myself just to make sure. What I'm running there right now is a Vox amp model. It's you put the switch in the middle on the amp model setting. It's supposed to emulate a Vox. So it's got kind of a chime to it. But I've got it set up really clean because for this live stream, I just want the distortion coming from the Strymon Riverside. All right, somebody else said, hey, Bill, can you throw a couple pedals on that you haven't used for a while? And I kind of went back and thought, you know, I haven't used the Source Audio Nemesis or the Collider for a while. So I've got the Nemesis set up with a tape delay, and here's what that sounds like. Sorry about that. Hopefully my musical voice isn't broken tonight. Anyhow, you can hear that's kind of a tapey kind of thing going on. And then on the Collider, I've got the E-Dome reverb, just a little bit. And I've got a bunch of pre-delay just to have it swell in. And then I also have another delay set up on the Collider. So I've got delay on the Nemesis and the Collider. It's the digital delay type on the Collider. Okay. And if you put it all together, you get... Yeah, it's a nice, simple sound, but it kind of fits my vibe, and that's where I want to go next. We are going to get to the hands, right, which are really the most important part, but we do need to talk about effects a little bit as ambient guitarists. So a couple things I'd like to mention. One is get a good amp sound. We already kind of talked about that, but I'll just reiterate that. Get a good amp sound that you really like, that works well with effects, if you're using delays or reverbs, pitch shifters, whatever it might be. And then my suggestion is don't use more effects than you need to use to achieve the kind of sound you're going for. So really, if you look at that pedal board, it's not that crazy. I do have a volume pedal set up also. It's actually an expression pedal plugged into the Iridium, so it acts just like a volume pedal. But really, it's a pretty simple, basic kind of effects chain. But it is very flexible, even with the, you know, kind of the delays the way they're set up now. You can get very nice volume swells. You can still kind of play. Okay, so cool. And I won't do the distortion, but you know, it sounds really good with distortion too. So don't forget about that as you think about effects. Only use what you need. Now, you might need a lot of effects to achieve what you're looking to achieve, but don't use any more than what is absolutely necessary. All right, let me check the chat here real quick. Let's see. Hey, how do you make ambient sound like the sound of a tambura? If I recall, a tambura is kind of a drone, right? but it's it's from Indian classical music. So a tambura, tell me if I'm wrong here, but if I remember, the tambura is the drone instrument in an classical Indian music piece. So it's going to not only have the string that's providing the main pitch, but there are a bunch of sympathetic strings. So I think you're going to have to try to figure that out. I don't have a good answer for you right here. I'd have to do some experimenting. All right, how do you choose and tweak the virtual amps? Now that's a great question. I think about virtual amplifiers much like I think about a real physical amplifier. So I start by twisting the knobs, or if it's all on a screen, moving the controls on the screen into positions that I might use with a real amplifier. So for me, let's take a Fender style amplifier that has lows, mids, and high, controls. I would probably set the amplifier up for a pretty clean sound, because that's what Fenders do best, I think, is that kind of sparkly, clean sound. It's different from the chimey Vox, but it's a nice, sparkly high end. And then I'll typically dial in the mids to where I want, so it's going to be somewhere in the middle. The highs will be somewhere in the middle, and the lows will be brought down a little bit because I don't want it too boomy, so maybe 3 or 4 or something like that. That's the kind of thing I like to do. And then, since it's an amp modeler, I'll tweak it from there. But I think the first thing with the amp modeler is to find the actual amplifier model and then the speaker cabinet model that you're looking for and put them together. So again, for my example, I love Fender amp models combined with Marshall 4x12 speaker cabinets. And I typically like the models of the greenbacks, like the 20 or 25 watt greenback cabinets. So I put those together, and that gives me a basic sound, and then I tweak the tone controls from there. All right, great question. All right, so we've got guitar, we have effects, we have the amp models, we've got a sound that we like. Now, how do we start creating a voice that is unique? Now, I think one question or one answer to that is not to play the same thing that everybody else plays. But that can be easier said than done, right? Because there are millions of guitarists in the world. But I think maybe another way to think about it is to think about how you can give each note that you play some meaning. So let me give you an example here. So I've got, So let's just say I'm playing, this is, by the way, a G sharp minor on the baritone to an F sharp major. Okay, so let's just say I'm playing these chords. All right, and that's cool, but everybody can play that, right? Even guitarists who've only been playing for a few months, once they learn a bar chord, they can play that, and the strumming is, pretty straightforward. And I would say that I have not given all the notes that I just played meaning. So the way I would think about that, those two chords, is maybe something more along these lines, having the same kind of rhythm. All right, so I cut almost all the notes out, but the notes that I had left, I could concentrate on a little bit more. So again, as you think about your voice on guitar, think about cutting out some notes. I want to switch this up a little bit to kind of demonstrate maybe my next point as we think about adding meaning to each note. Let me slow that down a little bit. So I'm going to stay on those same two kind of the same kind of chord progression. Okay, so if I was playing the whole chords. Okay. So what I'm attempting to do, and I'm not doing it very well tonight, is making space again for the notes, but also creating a kind of variety between notes that sustain and notes that I'm not letting sustain. And that's another technique to think about using. And you don't have to do it just like I'm doing it here, right? You may not be, hybrid picking. You might have a totally different tonality. But again, you're kind of paying attention to the notes you're playing and trying to give each one some meaning as you play it. And then one of the big things to think about also with your favorite players is, what kind of movement are they injecting into each note that they play, right? So these notes are not just bare notes. Your favorite player does something special with each note. So on that note there, I'm actually using the fingernail of my right ring finger to create a more kind of wispy sound on that note. And that's actually a technique that I use a lot for quieter, more clean pieces. So there are techniques that your favorite players have like that they're using to create movement or textures or tonality to the notes that they play. So I would also suggest maybe looking for techniques that you enjoy playing that can help you provide variation in the tonality of the notes. Let me pause here and just kind of look through the chat for a minute. Alrighty, let's see here. What about effects? So Sarander says, what about effects such as tremolo, univibe, and Leslie, which are more tempo than tone, but also add some tonality? Yeah, absolutely. If you think about in particular, some of the older players using those old Leslie cabinets to create movement in the notes and tonality, that was a great technique. It sounds wonderful. You can do a lot of great things with it. I love like kind of grungy slide playing through. I don't play slide, by the way, but I love to hear grungy slide playing through a Leslie cabinet. I think it sounds really good. All right. Why do time zones exist? Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, anyhow, you can use these techniques of kind of playing less notes and trying to emphasize the notes, whether you're playing clean or whether you're playing with, a little bit of dirt or crunch. Now, the thing you'll notice is, because of the distortion, notes tend to blend together more easily and become less distinct. So as you move up in the gain, you're going to have to learn how to deal with keeping the notes distinct. that still sounds pretty good, but if I go full distortion with what I just did, it's going to be fairly muddy. And, you know, that's not bad, but as I think about playing there, I'm going to want to control the notes more to allow them to ring out clear. As you can hear, I didn't allow notes to ring too much, a little bit, but not too much, because I wanted to make sure that I was maintaining clarity with all of that gain, right? Otherwise, it's just kind of a mess. So I'm kind of rolling here from one thing to the other, right? So another thing to think about is whether you're allowing strings to ring out or stop them. I kind of said that before, but one technique I use a lot is actually stopping the strings by palm muting, or since I do a lot of hybrid picking, my middle finger and ring finger and pinky finger are usually available, and I actually use them to stop strings also, so that I can just focus on the strings that I want to sound out when I'm playing leads. So let me show you what I mean. Just kind of watch my hand here. So I'm trying to maintain control of which strings are ringing at all times to make sure that only the ones I want to ring are actually producing sound. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me check some more comments here. Let's see here. How would you set a delay if you had to play odd time signatures? Ha! I actually have a video for that where I'm playing in different time signatures and setting delays for that. Basically, what you can do if you're using a tap tempo, and I don't have time to demo it now, but basically think about the pattern. Let's say you're playing in 5 and you're subdividing in 3 and 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So you can do that a couple of ways. You can just tap in your delay beat every 5 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. Now that's going to be a fairly long delay. Or you can tap in on 3 or 2 and then let the delay kind of cycle in and out of rhythm, which gives it a really cool sound. So that's, as I mentioned, I've got a whole video on some of those techniques. Okay, I have some problems growing my nails. What would be a good way to get? Oh yeah, nail growing. So I've been growing mine out for a long time. I don't let them get super long. I just want enough so that the flesh of my finger and the nail can contact the string. And this will lead into another point about your musical voice. But I don't have any good tips for growing nails out. I would suggest maybe trying to avoid all those harsh chemicals of coating your nails if you don't have to. I don't think that's the best thing for health. But this does lead into another tip to think about, and that is the type of pick that you're using or your fingers. That's going to make a big difference in the tonality of your playing, right? Which is going to affect your musical voice. So I like to use picks that are pretty thick. This is a 2.5 millimeter jazz pick that I really like on the baritone, and I even use it on regular guitars. The reason why I like it is because I do use my fingers and my pick together, and I feel like it gives me a consistent tone between the pick and the fingers. So it blends together really nicely, and even with a distorted tone, I can really kind of blend them together. So that works for me, and I have spoken with a number of people who do not prefer very thick picks. As a matter of fact, one of my best musical buddy friends, really, he likes basically a Fender medium, which I think is like, I don't know, 0.6 or 0.7 millimeters. It's not even a 1 millimeter pick. And I gotta admit, he plays some pretty fabulous guitar. So what works for him and what works for me are two different things. But it is important to think about that pick and how it affects your tonality. All right, a little more chat here. Let's see what we got going on. Okay. We got the nails thing. How do you loop multiple tracks with the same tone without sounding muddy? Yeah. So I don't have a looper set up, so I can't demo it. But what I would say is play less notes. Like that full... Okay, that might sound really cool on the first loop layer, but by the time you add 2 or 3 layers, it's going to be full, just muddy, right? So play less notes. Use that technique of really kind of concentrating on only the notes that you want to ring out. Yamaha THR-10. Somebody mentioned that. I would like to try one of those. I've heard a lot of good things about that unit. Okay. So there's... Okay, I can't do it here. What about delay with distortion? Because delay will repeat the strings you just muted, which defeats the point of muting the strings. That's a very good point. And you've got to be really aware and be thinking about what every note is going to be doing through the delay. So, yeah, I've got a muted note there. Right? So you've got to really think about all the notes that are going on through the delay. And you're right. If your delay is not set up properly, or if you have too much delay for the style of music or the piece that you're playing, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. Okay, let's see. John White says, do you get these pedals for free sponsoring them? I've addressed this before, but happy to address it again because I know not everybody hears all the video, watches all the videos or whatever. Typically for me, it's a combination. I actually buy a lot of gear. One of the things I'm really thankful for this YouTube channel for is that while it does not provide enough money for me to quit my day job, it does provide money to help me buy equipment. And in many cases, I buy equipment so that I can share it with all of you. So as I look at the pedalboard there, I purchased the Strymon Compadre, and I purchased the Source Audio Nemesis, and the Riverside and the Iridium and the Collider I did not purchase. Now, I was not sponsored in the sense that those companies paid me money to do a demo, but typically the way it works is they all have budgets for sending out demonstration units of pedals to different, players. And they're going to be players that have some kind of audience on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. And then the hope is that if they send them a pedal, they'll like the pedal and decide to do some content, a video or a blog or whatever about the pedal. So that's typically the way it works. I've only done 2 or 3 sponsored videos here on the channel over the last 7 years where a company has paid me money to demonstrate a pedal. I also only like to do, when I'm demoing or reviewing a pedal, I only do generally positive demoing or reviews. In other words, I don't like to demo pedals here on the channel that I don't enjoy using or that I wouldn't recommend for you guys. I want to make sure that whatever I'm showing you are pieces of equipment that I like, that I use, that I would be happy to use, if that makes sense. All right. Any advice for a bass player venturing into ambient noodling? I don't have a ton of advice. I'm a fake bass player, but what I would say is you have the same challenge before you as the guitarists do in the crowd, right? So your challenge is to create a bass voice. And I think a lot of these techniques kind of go across instruments, right? You're going to be dealing with your tonality, your phrasing, what notes you're allowing to ring out, what notes you're not allowing to ring out, lots of things like that, right? All right, so I'm going to hold off there on some more comments or questions, and let's keep talking about building that voice that's unique to you, that communicates musically what you're interested in communicating. One thing I would suggest as you think about building or developing that voice is to leverage techniques that maybe you've learned from another genre of music. So, for example, if you're looking to build an ambient guitar or progressive rock voice, use some different techniques. Here's my example. One of my music loves, is bluegrass. And one of my early influences guitar-wise is Norman Blake, who is a fabulous bluegrass flat picker. So when I was a teenager, I learned how to flat pick. I could do better on an acoustic guitar, but hopefully you get the point, right? I'm using flat picking techniques for something that is not bluegrass. You never know what what you're gonna come up with, but it will be interesting, and it may very well be something that you can leverage to build a truly unique voice. So I like to think there's not too many players out there in the ambient guitar field who are essentially flat picking. So kind of cool. I will even use that a little bit with leads sometimes, but again, I've got to be really careful, right? Because I don't want all those notes to ring out. All right, that's another thing to think about. All right, so let me do one more thing here, and then we'll get back to comments and questions. Another thing to think about is in terms of adding color to your notes, your voice, is the use of vibrato. And I've gotten critiqued here on the channel occasionally about the way I use vibrato usually. But anyhow, as you think about vibrato, there's really 3 different ways that you can move the string to create a vibrato effect. Obviously, you can move the string across the fingerboard, in other words, in line with the fret. Right? And that's pretty common in rock music. You can use a more classical guitar kind of type of vibrato, or maybe violin. Right? And that's going to be a little more subtle because you're not kind of doing mini bends on the strings. But there is a third way that's even more subtle that I use quite a bit. You may or may not be able to see it as I play, but it's actually pressing the string into the fingerboard and then lightening the touch on the string. So I actually do that quite a bit. It's not, I'm exaggerating it here just so you can kind of see it. But what that does is it creates a little micro bend in the pitch of the string as you push down on it. And you can use it to create very subtle movements in the string that are almost like it's a vibrato for sure because the pitch is changing, but it can create very subtle chorusing effect. So it's hard for me to demonstrate it because as I'm thinking about it, I'm doing it way too obviously. But I actually prefer instruments with higher frets because I like that technique. This PRS has jumbo frets and they're decently high, but I really like my old Carvin Fat Boy, the HF2. You may have seen it here on the channel. It has very high frets, and as you play it, you can. It's almost like having a scalloped neck, in a subtle way, right? But you can really bend the strings and apply vibrato vertically, if you will, by pressing harder or lighter on the string. So think about vibrato and how you're using it to add. I like to think of it as an accent to your notes, right? In your language, in your musical language. I would say, especially for lead, almost every note I play has some kind of movement to it. I very rarely just play straight notes with no pitch movement. All right, I'm leading into the next tip, but I'm going to hold off for just a minute. See what else we got going on here on the chat. Sorry. Man, there's a lot of comments tonight. That's awesome, guys. Really appreciate it. What are my thoughts on Robert Fripp's solo soundscapes? I love them. They're great. He certainly has been a pioneer in that whole side of things. What are the cheapest, best results for Frippertronics? Again, thinking of Robert Fripp, I would say get the cheapest delay you can find that has at least a 4-second delay, preferably 6 or more seconds, and then just hook that in to your effects chain and then crank the delay time up to the longest time, and you have instant Frippertronics. Obviously, if you're using something like the Strymon El Capistan, or if you've got a looper that does decaying loops like the TC Electronic Fripper, the TC Electronic Ditto X4, you've got more flexibility in terms of the time of the loop. But that's it, basically. And if you listen to Robert Fripp's early Frippertronics, you'll hear that most of his loops are only a few seconds long, 4, 5, 6 seconds or so, because of the physical limitations of the 2 tape decks that he used. Any advice on how to choose strings? I would say get the strings that you're comfortable with, and do a little trial and error to see what you prefer. I tend to prefer heavier strings, not super, super heavy strings, but for standard electric, I like 1046s. The 09s and the 08s, I feel like I'm going to break the strings, and I don't feel like there's enough beef there for me to be able to play subtly. If that sounds weird, right, with a heavier string, but that's, and I do like the tone better. I know that Rick Beato did an episode, I think last year, about lighter strings, and I respect it, but I still feel like for me they sound a little bit better. But it's a very personal choice, like so many things. So what I would suggest is just invest a little bit of money and buy 4 or 5 sets of strings of different brands and gauges, and then change your strings once a week with the 4 or 5 sets, and then see which one you like the best. Let's see here. Best apartment amp you would recommend? Well, for an apartment, I would recommend an amp modeler, and that way you can keep the volume down as low as you need to, but dial in the exact tone that you're looking for. I don't use an amplifier at all anymore. I still own 4 amps, but I don't use them. I'm strictly amp modeling, partially because I have complete control over the volume for my old tender ears. Do you think you could do a blues number on your channel? No, I don't think so. That's not really the direction of the channel. I love blues, though. B.B. King rocked, like serious rocked. And also Mississippi Fred McDowell. I love Mississippi Fred McDowell. Here we go. Another one about blues. So Carolina Sky says, I love playing blues. Can you combine blues and ambient together? You can. What is ambient anyway? It's whatever you want it to be, right? We're artists. The sky is the limit for us. We can do whatever we want. If you love blues and you love big delays and reverbs, put them together and figure out how to create something unique out of it. Maybe that's your musical voice, right? Ambient blues. If you hear a fire siren, it's because I live in an old town that still has a firehouse that blows the fire siren. So it'll be over in a minute. I'm going to ignore it. Tips for using the Game Changer pedal plug. I can't give you tips tonight. I do have a couple of videos about that pedal, so I suggest you look them up. All right. So where else do we go here? We've talked about vibrato. Let's talk about other ways to move the string. Okay, to give variety to your playing, your phrasing as you're playing notes or chords. So there we go. There we go. That's what I want. Okay. So we've got vibrato. Don't be afraid to use vibrato on your chords. That's a really cool technique that's well worth kind of figuring out how to do well. Yeah, it's really nice. A couple of other things, though, that are related are the use of hammer-on and pull-offs. That can really bring a lot of variety as you're playing either chords or leads, because a pulled off or hammered on string sounds different than a picked string. Okay? it does get very interesting when you're playing lead. You don't have to pick every note. I think it's well worth practicing if you dial up a lead tone. Just play lead lines and don't use a pick at all. You can use your right hand to mute the strings so you don't end up with a muddy mess. It's definitely worth figuring that out. It's really, you'll find a lot of use for it. So one of the other things too, so we've got kind of vibrato, hammer-on pull-offs. Another thing that I think is really important is bending strings. And somebody gave me a $5 super chat. Hey, thanks, Dylan. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. And I don't know if you ask a question, but if I see it, I will definitely answer it. Give me just a minute, though. One of the other things I think that's related are bending strings, right? So we can do those typical, kind of bends, but you can use them in a very subtle way, too. One of the things I like to do sometimes is I'll bend before I play the note so I can do a down bend. I can do the up bend, but I can also do a down bend. And I can also bend into another note. I like that technique a lot, actually. So think about bends. So if you don't practice them a lot, practice them some. Now, I'm not doing, I don't have a whammy bar, and I'm not doing dive bombing kinds of bends. These are baritone strings. I can't bend them very far, but it doesn't really matter. And just a little bit of bending of the string can add a lot of life and variety to your notes. All right, so let's go back here to some of the chat and see what's going on here. Man. All right, I'm looking for question marks. Faulty tenor. My whole synth rig is software based via laptop and iPad. Excellent. I'm kind of working on that with this iPad. I just recently bought this iPad and I'm trying to get it. That's part of the reason why I used it, was to kind of set it up. What pedal do I use for that soothing voice? Well, I've got a little mic here that you can't see, and that goes into a tube mic preamp. And that's how I get the voice. No, I don't know how I get the voice. That's just kind of what it is. Actually, I will tell you, if I can diverge from guitar voice to voice, I do feel like the quality of my voice has changed some over the last 7 years since I've been on YouTube. Some of that certainly is age. If you're younger, congratulations, you're going to be old someday like me. But as you get older, your voice naturally changes in its tonality, and certainly mine has. But from listening to my voice every single week, editing videos, I think it's really kind of changed my voice. As I've listened, I thought, I don't like what I do there, so I've kind of shifted a little bit. It's kind of interesting. And this, I wasn't thinking about this, but this kind of relates also to playing, right? So as you play more, as you practice more, as perhaps you're recording your music and listening to what you're playing, you're going to be hearing things that you love and hearing things that you don't love. And then take the opportunity to make those shifts. And you don't need to change big things, right? You can change small things a little bit at a time. And what you'll find is that over a longer period of time, it'll make a big difference. All right. Again, Dylan, thanks a lot. I found your super chat in the chat window. All right. What's your best way to get a volume swell without using the knob or a pedal? I mean, there are some auto swell units out there, right? The slow engine, the slow gear, etc. I use them occasionally, but I don't think any of them can replace a volume pedal in particular. And I'm sorry that you can't see my foot. That pedal board there on the screen is actually a photograph. I don't have two cameras yet. I'm working on it, but I don't have two cameras yet set up for live streaming. You can't. I've never played or used an auto swell unit that can provide that variable expression, right, as you're actually playing the notes. Right, that's really hard to do with anything except for a volume pedal, or if you've got a guitar with a volume knob in the right spot, yeah, you can do it with that too. Can you not just use software to do all the Strymon stuff? It is all software driven, right? Yeah, I mean, if you've been hanging out here on the channel, you've seen me use the Valhalla delay plugin, which is one of the most fabulous delays I have ever used, bar none, pedal or software. So yeah, I think at this point it's possible to go full software and get an incredible tone for sure. But I still love pedals. All right. Do I have an EQ pedal or do I EQ in post? I do not typically use an EQ pedal on my pedal board. If I'm using a multi-effects unit like the Headrush Pedalboard or the HX Stomp or the Helix LT, which I just purchased, and I did purchase that one recently, I do find that those units benefit more from having an EQ in the chain somewhere. But typically on pedal boards, I find that if you're careful dialing in the amp modeling, I don't typically feel a need to use an EQ pedal. All right, so there are some, I guess, some thoughts about moving the strings, right? You've got your right hand. Oh, I guess I should mention with the right hand too, you don't just have a pick available, you have other fingers. So if you take the time to learn how to hybrid pick, there's a lot you can do. I love hybrid picking because it gives me so much more flexibility for how I'm sounding notes together. But again, so I would definitely recommend it. If you're not into it, that's cool, but it's definitely worth looking into if you haven't tried it. Another thing to think about as you're building your musical voice is looking for unique chord voicings. And I'm saying that carefully because I don't think that I really do anything unique with any one single chord, right? So if I was playing a standard guitar, that would be kind of a C with an add 9, right? But that, with that shape, that's not unique, right? I didn't invent that. But, if I combine it with some other things that are maybe a little less common, maybe the minor 7th interval, again, I don't think anything I'm playing is unique, each individual chord shape, but when I put them all together, maybe it's a little less common. Maybe you hear it a little bit less from a lot of different players. So I would suggest looking for your version of that. Right? So look for those chord structures, those intervals. Don't be afraid to leave out notes, to isolate notes in what you're playing, and look for those tones that really kind of please you, that you feel are speaking, right, to the people who are listening to your music. All right, let me look at a few other things here. What would you say creating YouTube content makes you feel transcendence? Yeah, I'm a little unclear as to what you mean there by the wording, but what I would say about creating YouTube content, it's been a very enjoyable thing for me. When I first started the YouTube channel, I didn't really view it as part of my art, right? So I've got my music over here, and then I have the YouTube channel over here. But what I've come to realize over the years is that this YouTube thing really is part of my art, right? It's part of what I do as a musician, as an artist. So I view it as a kind of a holistic activity. And it's the thing that's been really great for me is it's kept my enthusiasm up to keep creating, right? So and I always want to play music here on the channel, even though we're talking about techniques tonight. Always want to play music, and that's part of the impetus to keep creating. So I would suggest for you guys to find, maybe you don't want to be a YouTuber. YouTube's a great place though, but so it's not for everybody. But find something like that really impels you forward as an artist, to keep you enthused and keep you moving forward. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my answer. Dadgad. Well, this is not Dadgad, but I do love Dadgad, though. I'm just using a split partial capo to fake a Dadgad tuning shape. That's totally fun. Totally fun. Don't use your pinky. Ring finger is stronger in classical music. Nobody uses the pinky for picking. Yeah, I don't use my pinky for picking either. So this brings me to another thing as we think about leads. If you guys are still okay, I'll go for a little bit longer. You guys good with that? Think about, when you're dealing with a higher gain tone, there's a lot of interesting things that come out as you pick the strings. So let me show you what I mean. That was interesting, wasn't it? Isn't that interesting? So you hear the harmonic series kind of shifting as I hit the string, and that was not a pinch harmonic. I actually played that string with my ring finger and used a little bit more of the nail and caught the string on the edge of the nail. So it allows the string to start out in a high gain situation with the kind of the more fundamental, but as it rings, you can hear the harmonic series shifting that's being emphasized, which is it's really cool. But again, that can provide a really interesting coloration to the note that you're playing. So definitely play around with, if you want to do more standard pinch harmonics, that's cool. Play around with those. Play around with other ways to shift the tonal color of a distorted lead note. Definitely worth working with, and practicing. Let's see. Have I tried any of the neural DSP DSP amp plugins? I have not. I've seen them though. They look pretty interesting. Okay. Let's see. One other thing to think about too is you're kind of creating that unique voice. Don't forget about the controls on your guitar. There is a move, there has been, to simplify controls on the guitar in an effort to get a, quote, pure sound from the guitar to the amp. I was watching a Rob Chapman video the other day, and he was demoing some stuff and had a green guitar with, I don't recall the brand, it was a green guitar with one humbucker and one volume control and no tone control. I respect that, but I couldn't live without my tone control. I also really, really enjoy having a volume control so that I can vary the volume, the gain coming into the pedals. Now, that didn't get rid of a lot of the distortion, but it definitely reduced the gain. And if I just use a slightly crunchy tone, you guys know this trick, right? You back off the volume control and the tone and the sound cleans up, right? The tone of the guitar cleans up. Right? And of course you can also control that by picking softer or harder, so don't forget that either. I forgot to mention that earlier. But the tone control in particular is where I really vary a lot. I very rarely turn my tone control all the way up. I usually keep it about 3 or 4. And if I'm playing lead, I turn it all the way down. I find it gives me a much... Whoa, my cable's getting in the way. I find it gives me a much smoother tone, which I really like. I realize not everyone likes it, but I like it. So it is a difference. Let me turn the tone control up and you'll hear it. You heard when I turned it up, all of a sudden you heard that P90 kind of spank come through, right? The transients came through. When I rolled the tone control down, the P90 sort of went away, and I was left with a very smooth, mid-rangey kind of honk, I like to call it. Again, this is me, right? This is what I like. You may hate that, and that's totally fine, right? The point I guess I'm trying to make is make use of your controls. You may not know about all the really cool sounds that your guitar can make unless you really play around with the controls to understand how they react with the pickups and the strings, your effects pedals, and your amplifier. All right. Somebody says P90s or humbuckers. Why does it have to be or? How about P90s and humbuckers? And Fender-style single coils. I love them all, and I have them all on different guitars. So I don't think you have to go either way. You do need to think about the tonality of your pickups, though, and then decide what fits the kind of music that you want to make. Yeah, that wasn't a good chord, was it? There we go. The P90 pickup has a really cool... I really like the treble. But the bottom end has a... It's more Fender single coil-ish in the bottom end, but it's not as rubber bandy sounding as a Fender is. And I mean that in a good way, right? That kind of spank, right, that you can get out of a Fender. You can't really get that out of a P90, but it is a cool sound. But I do love me some good humbuckers, as long as they're not high gain. I like lower gain humbuckers. Hey, Bill. Let's see. Have I experimented with 6-string bass? Yes, I have an Ibanez SR C6 short scale 6-string bass. So it's tuned an octave lower than a standard guitar, so E, A, D, G, B, E. So E, A, D, G are the exact same tuning as your standard 4-string bass. I like it. It's fun. I'm not a bass player, though. I'm a guitarist that fakes bass. So when I play it like I would play a guitar. But it's pretty cool nonetheless. All right. David said, I'm late. Will this be uploaded as a VOD? Yes. So all of my live streams will show up as video on demand. It might take a little while for YouTube to process it, but yeah, it'll be around for sure. Let's see. Hey, Bill, I use a Roland GR55 synth. Have you tried one? I have. I don't own one, but I remember trying one in a store at some point, and they're very cool. I have a long history with guitar synthesizers. My first one I bought in 79, I want to say. It was an ARP Avatar, and I was in college working part-time as a janitor, and it literally took me about a third of my salary for that year to go out and buy that ARP Avatar. But I used it a lot in the band I played in, and then I've had several since then. Right now I'm using the Jamstick Studio MIDI guitar, and that's been working really well to plug into the computer through a USB port and then be able to use the software plugins, in my case with Logic. It's working out pretty well. All right, have I ever considered an album without reverb and delay? No, I have not. Even my acoustic guitar album from 2008 has a decent amount of reverb in it, and it's mostly room reverb, but I can't imagine mixing down an album without at least a little bit of reverb to create a space around it. All right. Do I have any favorite scales or modes? I like them all. I think they all have their places. I don't think in scales. I think more in terms of melody when I'm playing. So I don't analyze what I do. Like when I am preparing to play a piece, which tend to be fairly improvisatory, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to use Mixolydian this time, or, Lydian or whatever. Thinking in a mode there. I was just thinking, okay, that minor seventh would sound pretty good. So I actually probably think more in intervals. That's probably what it is. I think more in intervals than scales, because I typically don't just play up a scale. And I know that's not what you do with the modes or anything like that, but I don't practice scales. I practice melodies. I practice playing intervals. I practice a lot of different techniques, but I don't typically just practice scales, whether it's a modal or actually everything's a mode, right? But anyhow, I know that's a really bad answer, isn't it? It's kind of the best I got. Let's see. Will I in the future make an album with both acoustic and electric guitar as either backing, vice versa? Love that sound. Yeah, actually, I have done that. And if you go back in my catalog to 2014, I did an album called Vision, and there's a lot of acoustic and electric guitar together on that album. I'm playing old traditional tunes on that album in an ambient guitar arrangement. So if you haven't heard Vision, it's just vision, like looking. You can look it up. It's on Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. It's from 2014. Any recommendations for using the Grand Canyon with an expression pad? No, I don't have any specific ones. I think that's a good experimentation source for you. I'm planning on a Telecaster build. It's cheaper to buy one, but I want the reward of the build. Any thoughts? Yes. I have been thinking about building a Telecaster-style baritone for the last year, probably from buying the parts from Warmoth, and I can't get it out of my head. And I know it would likely be cheaper to buy one, but I feel like I want that challenge of putting together a guitar. I don't want to carve the neck, but I'd love to kind of do the whole build. I think that would be a lot of fun. So I applaud you for that desire, because I have the same desire. Let's see, Nuno says, I love TC Electronics Flashback for delay. What do I think? I think TC Electronic makes great delay pedals. I've enjoyed using them over the years. In particular, one of my absolute favorite delays of all time is the Flashback triple delay. Oh, I love that pedal. That's a great, great, great pedal. And to the question earlier about whether I get pedals for free or stuff, that was one that I purchased, and I was happy. I'm so glad I spent the money to buy that pedal. All right. In a jam, do I recommend abandoning a stally digital note? Maybe a drone kind of thing, a stale digital note. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. If you're in a band setting and you've got lots of delays and reverbs, I will say this though, you can easily overwhelm the band. So you do need to think about the texture of sound across all the parts and the musicians in the band. And you know, that to me, that's one of the hardest parts about being in a band. You're working with a group of people, a team, hopefully your friends, but sometimes you get into arguments, right, about who should be able to do what in terms of arrangements. So definitely it's a challenge, in particular when you start adding in more ambient textures for sure. So Maxwell says, how do I choose or program rhythm sections to accompany my tone? So what I like to do, so I'm assuming you're asking about if I'm going to add a synthesizer track into a recording, which I do from time to time. If I'm not using drums, which I don't do very often, what I will do is use Logic Pro. Since I use Logic Pro as my recording software, I will use its ability to evaluate what I just played and figure out what my tempo was, and then I'll add in the synthesizer track, and it will follow along in terms of the actual tempo that I played at, right? Because I'm just a human, right? I'm not a machine, so when I play, my tempo is kind of, it stays kind of in a range, but there's a definite range of BPMs, right, to the notes. So it's really helpful to have Logic be able to say, oh, okay, this is how your tempo went. And that way, for example, if I'm using a synthesizer that's got maybe a modulating drone modulating to the tempo, it will adjust as I play to stay in time with me. Hopefully that helps. 9 or 10 gauge, Bill. 10. All right. So let me play a couple of other things here, and just if I could just ask you to kind of look at what I'm doing with some of the hands, and I'm not even sure what I'm going to play yet. I think we'll turn on I think we'll do that. I'm going to stay in this key of B major here, but just look at some of the techniques I'm using as I play. Did you catch some of those techniques that I talked about? There was a bunch of them in there, right? Pull-offs, hammer-ons, vibrato, bends, the picking with fingers and pick for different textures, etc. So, yeah, I try to live by some of those techniques I told you about, through this live stream. So anyhow, I think it's about time to sign off for the evening. I've got a little glass of beer on the floor. It's a stout. Love stouts. And I was hoping to enjoy a little bit of alongside the live stream, but I've been having too much fun. But I'm going to get back to that and enjoy that. And, you know, I want to close this out by just telling you all how much I appreciate each one of you for hanging out here on the channel, for listening to the music, for commenting, for just being a part of this community. If you have any questions or want to chat about anything, I really do read the comments a lot on all the videos each and every day. So, some people post silly things and I don't bother, responding to that. But for people that post real questions and want to chat about real topics, I'm all over that. I love having conversations. So feel free to hit me up in any of the video comments. And again, I just really appreciate all of you for being part of this great, awesome ambient guitar community. And we're between holidays here in the U.S., maybe in a lot of the world, right? Between Christmas and New Year's. So I'm going to take this opportunity to wish all of you a happy New Year. And now I'm going to go end the live stream, but I've got this cool little iPad here, but what I didn't do was move the end the live stream button close to me. So I'm going to have to actually walk over here. What a great way to end this live stream. Anyhow, hope you all have a great holiday, happy New Year. And when you go back to work, I'll be back at work on Monday. When you go back to work on Monday, don't be too depressed. Think about all the great music that you can make as an ambient guitarist. That's enough to make anybody happy. All right, I'm done preaching. See y'all later. I'm going to turn it off now. Here we go. Boom.